Good morning, everyone. We'll be reading 1 Kings chapter 21, verses 1 to 7, talking about two different workers trying to work in a different vineyard. Sometime later, there was an incident involving a vineyard belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. The vineyard was in Jezreel, close to the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. Ahab said to Naboth, "Let me have your vineyard to use for a vegetable garden, since it is close to my palace. In exchange, I will give you a better vineyard, or if you prefer, I will pay you whatever it is worth." But Naboth replied, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." So Ahab went home, sullen and angry, because Naboth the Jezreelite had said, "I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers." He lay on his bed sulking and refused to eat. His wife Jezebel came in and asked him, "Why are you so sullen? Why won't you eat?" He answered her, "Because I said to Naboth the Jezreelite, 'Sell me your vineyard, or if you prefer, I will give you another vineyard in its place.' But he said, 'I will not give you my vineyard.' Jezreel, his wife, said, 'Is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite.'"
I want to talk about a story that's been in the news. What's interesting is that one part of the story is not new. It's been around for a couple of years, but it's been back in the news again. It's the story of Ethan Couch. And Ethan Couch was a Texas teenager. He was 16 in 2013. And Ethan got drunk, stole his father's car, speeding down the road, lost control of the car. And at the side of the road, there were a couple of vehicles that were stopped there. One was in distress, the other stopped to help. And there was a number of people that were there, and Ethan plowed his car through the group of people. Killed 4, injured 11. And you're probably thinking, this is really quite the, you can imagine legal authorities just really coming down to bear on a young man who did this. But what was interesting about this is that when it finally appeared in court, the defense lawyers came up with what appears to be a fairly novel argument called affluenza. Now, the word affluenza is not original to this, but as a defense, apparently it is. So what is affluenza? Well, it's a combined word. You take two words, you put them together, and in a sense create another word. And the two words together are the words affluence, which means having lots of material things, unlike what Tim was talking about, and influenza, which comes from the word influence, which actually the origin of the word influence comes from the stars, from astrology. Going way back, the idea was that the stars affected people's lives, and so when somebody got sick with this thing that got named influenza, back in the old days, they didn't know where that came from, so they just attributed it to the stars. So now what they've done is to combine these two words to create this word affluenza. And so the way the defense worked on this, now I want you to think about this statement that came, that he was so financially and personally privileged that he was unable to understand the consequences of his actions. Now, we've become accustomed to the idea of, defenses based on what's called diminished capacity, where somebody either because of personal, emotional, or psychiatric reasons, has an inability to understand what they're doing. But the lawyers argued that this young man, because he came from such a wealthy upbringing and background, that he just didn't understand. He had no concept of other people. And, kind of in the back of your mind, you're probably going, what? Where did this come from? Well, if you think about it, this is a symptom or an evidence of a problem we have today. We have many people in our culture who have a sense of privilege and entitlement. Just watch how people drive sometimes. You've probably seen the bumper sticker that says, "As a matter of fact, I do own the road." Because that's kind of the way people respond to some drivers who they're driving as though there's nobody else on the road, or as though this is theirs and everybody else should get out of the way. I always love it when I get into really heavy traffic and I've got a line of cars in front of me and I've got somebody behind me tailgating me, wanting me to go faster. Like, where am I going to go? We have many people who have no awareness or concern of how their actions affect the lives of others. They're just oblivious. In fact, I get a email from one source, and he's kind of coined the term for these people. He calls them obliviots, which is a combination of oblivious and idiots. Obliviots. Now I've taught you a new word, right? It's a problem of selfishness. Fixated on me and what I want, which is that sense of entitlement. So I thought the story of Naboth's vineyard really, from 1 Kings 21, really kind of demonstrates this is not a new thing. Because we have here King Ahab. Ahab is the king of the northern kingdom of Israel, headquartered in the capital city of Samaria. Remember that this is the kingdom that broke away from the southern kingdom that became Judah, that rejected the line of David as king. And as Jeroboam established this kingdom, he created the golden calves at Dan and Bethel for them to worship, so they didn't have to go back or wouldn't go back to Jerusalem. That was really something to create more loyalty to the northern kingdom and the fear that loyalty would continue to the south. So it's a kingdom built on idolatry and then immorality and apostasy. So Ahab stands out, and we'll see a quote in just a minute. And so there's a piece of land right near his palace that's owned by Naboth. And Ahab says to Naboth, "Please sell me your property." And Naboth says, "I can't, and I won't. This is my family's inheritance." Now, you know that Ahab was probably pretty insistent in his approach. So to be rebuffed, he is king, to be rebuffed by Naboth, he wants that property. And so when there's something you really want, that's called coveting, isn't it? It's interesting in the New Testament that coveting is referred to as idolatry, because people are putting things almost as their God. The want is so strong. And so Ahab just wants this so bad. this reminds me of, you go into the little store and you see a little child who wants a toy or a piece of candy, and, oh, I need... and they sound like they're going to die if they don't get it. And then when mom or dad says no, then there's the tantrum and the throwing on the floor and the screaming and kicking and all of that. Well, guess what? Did you notice? That's what Ahab does. He goes into the palace, throws himself on the bed, and has a tantrum. This is not a 2-year-old. This is the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. And I can only imagine that his wife Jezebel looks at him in utter disgust. You're the king. What are you doing? And so Jezebel says, look, get yourself up there. I will look after it. And as the story continues, she conspires a plot to have Naboth falsely accused so that he will be put to death. So then Ahab can go take possession of the land himself. Now, it's Jezebel's plot, right? She's the one who thinks that, plans it. She's the one who organizes, gets it carried out. But what's interesting is God's view here. And that's seen in the place or the role of the prophet. So God tells Elijah to go confront Ahab, not Jezebel. Ahab. See, if you think about it, he is the one who is coveting, right? He is the one who is having the tantrum, who is allowing this piece of property to become more important than anything else, even his dignity. And God sends Elijah to say, have you not murdered a man and seized his property? Ahab's affluenza has led him to accept his wife Jezebel's actions and to accept the property that became available because of the murder. God holds him accountable for it. He can't plead momentary insanity. He can't plead affluenza. He can't plead even that, well, it's my wife that really did this, not me. He has accepted what she has done. But what's interesting is when Elijah goes to approach him, he says, so you have found me, my enemy. It's interesting how many times we see in the Old Testament how some of the kings resent strongly the prophets, the people who've been sent by God to speak to them. And how they consider, we have that expression, don't shoot the source. Well, see, Ahab is blaming the source here as he comes up. But Ahab is a man who is messed up in so many ways. The summary of Ahab, found in verse 25, there was never a man like Ahab who sold himself for idolatry. God did not allow him, what is the expression we use, to cop a plea? He's fully accountable. That's one of the things that I think we have to recognize, is that, we are accountable for what we do. So how did Ethan And I apologize to any Ethans here. How did Ethan Couch get the way he was? A couple of things I learned in looking at this story. Number one, his parents were not unfamiliar in the courts. They had court appearances. We won't get into the details, but they had been brought into court for different reasons before. His mother helped him escape to Mexico, 2015, and had a going away party before they left. Isn't that interesting? He is put on probation, and mom helps him flee to Mexico. You getting a picture here about a dysfunctional family? Were they permissive, or maybe the word should be over-permissive? Were they overindulgent? Were they unable to ever say no to this young man? I suspect that they never said no to him. So from one standpoint, this story reminds us of the role of parents in the Bible. Number one, the importance of example. You know, bottom line is, you could say that Ethan was only doing what he saw his parents doing. Maybe he carried it to a greater extreme. But you know, the expression is used that the nut doesn't fall very far from the tree. That much of what we are is the result of the home that we grew up in. One of the things that I say to couples in premarital counseling is that your parents, the home you grew up in, the relationship that your parents had, is the kind of the default pattern. That's what you learned growing up. Now, God's given us the conscious ability to change and to modify. We don't have to be that. You know, if you grew up in a dysfunctional family, you don't have to have a dysfunctional family when you marry and you have children. We have a wonderful God-given gift of change. We can understand, we can learn, we can alter our behavior. But the example in the home is kind of the beginning point. But from a biblical perspective, home is where we teach values. We teach right and wrong. Didn't Ethan's parents ever teach him, you don't drive a car into somebody? You know, you begin to think about all of the things that come along with this. And you wonder, well, what was taught? Or was there just a moral vacuum for what he had? What about the golden rule? Do to others what you would have them do to you. How could... You know, one of the things that kind of intrigued me about this is a story from Texas. This is a story from part of the United States that people understand as the Bible Belt. And I understand that not everybody that lives in the Bible Belt has anything to do with the Bible. There are a lot of people that are as far away from the Bible as they are anywhere else in the world. But at least there's more, it's at a higher profile for people to hear. I mean, think about it. How many times in the world have you heard, do to others as you would have them do to you? How many times do you see somebody write in a letter to the editor in the Free Press or another form of the media? You know, it's a concept that's deeply embedded in our culture. And yet somehow this young man is able to stand up in the court and say, I didn't know that actions have consequences and that I shouldn't hurt my neighbor. Home is the place of training for life. Parents, we understand, as Christian parents, we understand that. That's what we're trying to do with our kids. That's why we put our kids in Sunday school. Not to abdicate responsibility for training, but to supplement what we're doing in our homes. We teach our children to pray. We teach our kids the values of Christian living. We teach our kids about responsibility, living in a community, loving our neighbor as ourselves. And you look at children who grow up in our environment, you see kids that are quite responsible. Yeah, I know when they're young, sometimes we think they're never going to get there, but they do. Because they are being taught and they are being trained. And so we have passages like, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he'll never depart from it. Paul saying, fathers, bring up your children in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. I want to close by telling you about another Texas teenager who got in trouble. All right, so there's Ethan that we've been talking about. This different other Texas teen is from a story written by James Ragland in the Dallas Morning News yesterday. It's always convenient. Always amazing to me how these things pop up when they do. But this young man, his name is Alex, 17. And he got himself in trouble with his parents. They were away, and so he did what some teenagers do while mom and dad are away. He had a party. Any teens squirming right now? Oh, no. And that party, there was drinking and all kinds of other things going on. There was a lot of damage. In fact, when the parents came home, you can imagine the mess they found. The insurance company covered the cost after $2,000 deductible. So if your little mental calculator's rolling through your head, you're realizing, man, I wouldn't want to be that teen facing my parents. And so what they did is they took away his car keys, sold his guitar collection, what do you figure? One really mad teenager? It's amazing to me how different parents and different families have different outcomes. Here's what Alex said. Oh, and also that he's repaying the deductible. All right, his response: they trusted me, and I violated that trust. They've raised him with a sense of responsibility. They've raised him with a sense of accountability. They've raised him with a sense of moral values. He's not doing it perfectly, but he's got something going on inside. And so they trusted me. I violated that trust. And I understand why they want me to do this. And I'm perfectly willing to go through with this. Unfortunately, Alex will not get as much attention as Ethan. And yet, in some ways, don't you think he should? I don't know if there's any religious values in the home. But we would look at this and say, they're teaching their son moral values of right and wrong. They're also teaching him a concept of forgiveness and grace. They publicly are expressing their love for him, and he is secure in that love. I think it's tragic that there are so many people in the world that are so obsessed with things, so obsessed with themselves, so obsessed with their rights that they are willing to trample anything and anyone to get them. Where the value of God's Word is for us to show love to all those around us, to put others before self as we serve God. Listen to the words of this song, because it's about a choice that we're making. I am resolved no longer to linger, charmed by the world's delights, things that are higher, things that are nobler. These have allured my sight. Let's stand as we sing.